Hi, Smarter News. Today I'd like to do something that I wouldn't be able to do as easily on network news, and that is to take a little bit of a closer look at just one piece of the story in Afghanistan. One of the things that you want to do as a journalist is you always want to cover the details and the facts in the best way possible, but you want to do that and not lose sight of the bigger picture. And in a few stories I'm seeing, we're doing that a little bit, and I want to point that out to you. Before I get to Afghanistan and these critical final hours of America's withdrawal, I do want to mention what's going on with Hurricane Ida, which is one of the largest, strongest storms that have ever hit America. And actually, it's this incredible video to show you of it, what it looked like, satellite imagery. Now it's been downgraded to a tropical storm. But here's just an example of how the details sometimes can get in the way of the bigger picture. Often the news, what do we report when it comes to a hurricane? We report whether or not it's a category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That reading really refers to the wind strength and the damage that can be caused by the wind. And that gets the biggest headlines, doesn't it? But when you really look at what causes the most amount of death, the deadliest part of a storm, it's not necessarily the wind. It's actually the water. And we don't have a reading on that. So that's not going to be the flashiest of headlines. But although this storm has been downgraded, it's no longer a hurricane at this moment, we have to remember that the water can actually be the deadly part of it, and the flooding that can actually continue beyond these major headlines of the category 4 storm. So that's just an example. Again, we want to cover the details. We want to give you everything that we can, but we also don't want to lose sight on what can really impact you in your life. And so there's something like this, a very similar way we can parallel this to how we talk about foreign policy too. Because what do we do with foreign policy? We're looking at storms on the horizon, something that can come and affect us here at home, and we don't want that. While we're looking at these final hours of the drawdown in Afghanistan, we've received reports of rockets being fired at Kabul airport. It's really important at this moment, which is still very early in the morning in America on Monday. We don't have one group claiming responsibility for those rockets, but just want to flag for you the Defense Department at the Pentagon, the briefings that we've received have raised concerns about targeting of planes. And we know how many planes are coming in and out of that airport right now, and that these last final hours are actually the most dangerous because it's when we actually have to get everybody out, including our military members. So here's what I want to focus on. There was a really interesting exchange that happened late on Friday at the State Department, and then also again on Saturday at the Pentagon. And it was a question regarding the Haqqani network and the Taliban. Basically, a reporter was asking the State Department about the Haqqani network running security around Kabul airport. If you're not familiar with the Haqqani network, don't worry, we're going to talk about it in a second. And the State Department, the spokesman responded and said, well, the Haqqani network is a separate entity than the Taliban. And this raised the antenna of a lot of people that are interested in this subject. The next day at the Pentagon, another journalist asked again, is it the position of the U.S. government that the Haqqani network and the Taliban are separate entities? What is that about? And the Pentagon said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that there's a commingling of the two or a marbling of the two. And you see, the details of this have sometimes gotten in the way of a larger conversation about terrorism. So let's talk about what the Haqqani network is. This is where the Haqqani network is based. It's in this area between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Haqqani network was developed by the family with the name Haqqani. And the Haqqanis have a history of working with Al-Qaeda. In fact, the leader of the group at one time was the mentor to Osama bin Laden. The Haqqani network is one of the most advanced terrorist organizations that's out there. They also have a close affiliation with the Taliban. In fact, the reports show at this time that the Taliban have put the Haqqani network in charge, more or less, of airport security. So this is raising the question of, wait a minute, when we say the United States is coordinating with the Taliban around the airport, are we actually coordinating with a group that's a foreign terrorist organization that has worked with Al-Qaeda, which is the exact reason that we're in Afghanistan to begin with? See? Right? So these are raising all sorts of questions. Now, how do we know what a foreign terrorist organization is? And why do we say that the Taliban is not a foreign terrorist organization? There's actually a list that you can look up at the U.S. State Department. Here's the list that's going to start to scroll. These are a list of the foreign terrorist organizations. Al-Qaeda is listed, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Islamic State in Iraq, which was previously Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State Khorasan, which we've talked about, The Haqqani network is listed as a foreign terrorist organization. A part of the Taliban in Pakistan is listed as a foreign terrorist organization. The Taliban is not listed as a foreign terrorist organization. There's been all this debate over the years about whether or not that should be the case. And sometimes that's been described as saying the reason for not putting them on the list of foreign terrorist organizations is because they themselves as a group don't aim to attack the United States. But of course, others say, well, if they're affiliated with groups that have attacked the United States or want to attack the United States, then why do we even make that distinction? Why we make that distinction gets back to the question that I asked at the beginning. The details are important. The groups are sometimes different, right? There's different leadership when we're talking about terrorism overall. There might be different philosophies in some way of how these groups want to run a country like Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about adversaries of America. You're not talking about any of these groups as potential allies of the United States, despite the fact that the U.S. government at this time has been talking about working with the Taliban on airport security. That's very limited in scope. And so we don't want to, what is that expression? Not see the forest through the trees and lose sight of this broader enemy of the United States, which is Islamic terrorism. Let me show you what was going on Friday. This is in Syria. So while many in America were mourning the deaths of U.S. service members in Afghanistan, this is in Syria. That flag, the Taliban flag, is what was raised in the streets there by a group that's been distinguished before as a terrorist organization. So there was a celebration that was taking place. And this has led analysts around the world, not just in the United States, to say what's happening in Afghanistan is going to be galvanizing for this movement of Islamic terrorism. It's going to lead to recruitment. It's going to be a rallying cry. We're seeing this already being used in that way. There's already been a movement of want to be or actually affiliated Islamic terrorists moving into Afghanistan. And why were we there? Why did we go in 20 years ago? Because we did not want Afghanistan to be a safe haven for terrorism. So while I think it's really important that you're familiar with the Haqqani network, and by the way, if this is the first time that you're hearing about the Haqqani network, think about that, because this is the group that helped support bin Laden. And this is the group that's been working with the Taliban overall. And how could we not be talking about them on the news all the time so that it's a very easy thing for us to recall? It tells us something about the storytelling that we're doing and makes me really reflect as a journalist whether or not we've been really reporting and highlighting the right things in order to tell America's story in the best way so that you can feel equipped, so you can participate in this conversation and vote accordingly, because that's what it's really about. So those exchanges at the State Department and the Defense Department were critical because they highlight still at the highest levels a confusion about the affiliations of these groups and how they actually are affecting us here at home, what sort of threat they pose us here at home. But I hope that connects the dots a little bit for you. And this is why there's a big concern, not only about the next several hours at Kabul airport, because if the Haqqani network or associates are running airport security for the Taliban, how much control do we really have? How much trust could we possibly have? And how much is this threat for our soldiers? That's number one. That's in the immediate hours. Then if we look over the next several months and years, how is this setting up an environment, actual, working government with these different branches that are now highly trained, have 20 years of war, have our additional equipment on the ground? How do those actually pose a threat to us here at home? And what does that look like? That's going to be the next kind of iteration of this story. So, like I said, I don't think I would get a couple of minutes on network news to talk about this. And that's why you develop your own news network, because I do think this is important. And I absolutely think that we can do a deeper dive on this. And I have a couple interviews lined up that will take a deeper dive, because I know you're interested in foreign policy. And I want to make sure that we do connect these dots. When I was a young journalist and learning a lot of this, it really kind of opened my mind about there were parts of the story that I wasn't even covering appropriately. And I don't want to do that here. I want us to see all the many different angles. So much more coming. I'm going to be watching the news very closely. It's early morning Central Time here in America. It's getting to evening in Afghanistan. So just remember, as you move to your evening time here in America, Afghanistan is waking up to the final day of America's time in the country as the timeline now stands. So I'm going to be closely watching what's happening. What do we hear from the U.S. government in these final hours? Questions, comments, let me know. As always, I'm going to put a lot of this on our website so you can just have some time to poke through it if you'd like to. And I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you for all your support of Smarter News. Have a great week, you guys. I'll see you soon.